first question is about how do we make sense of the patterns across nations and across time periods. And I think so. I've dug into this on my Substack after Babel, working with Zach Roush. We've dug into the longitudinal data from many parts of the world, mostly the West. We don't have good data from Latin America or Africa or other parts. But what we find is two very important facts. So the first is that in many countries, what we see is no real trend in the early 2000s. And then all of a sudden, in the early 2010s, the numbers go up very sharply, especially for internalizing disorders, so anxiety and depression. And the numbers are sharper and the elbows are sharper for girls. And this is a pattern we see in many, many countries. So what that tells us is that we can't point to any one thing about the US, like the Affordable Care Act, and say, oh, that's what did it. Now, at the same time, those increases are not happening in all countries. We find them pretty much identically and pretty big in all the English-speaking countries. So we have a Substack post on that. It's really quite stunning how, it's as though in 2012 someone turned on a switch and rates of emergency room visits for psychiatric emergency rooms went way up in all the English-speaking countries. We find it in Scandinavia, not on all measures, but in general on the trends. And we find it in one survey of all of Europe, but we don't see it in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe, the numbers are actually down. And in East Asia, we're not seeing sharp spikes either. So what I think is going on here, what Zach and I believe is going on here, is that in the countries, what we find is that I'll just add in one thing, which is that in the US, kids in religious families don't go up very much, but kids in secular families go up a lot more. And so the way we interpret all of this is that freedom is generally a good thing. And the Anglo countries, the Scandinavian countries, kids had a lot of freedom. We have very free society, sort of the tightness, looseness dimension from Michel Gelfand. But when the tsunami swept across, when everyone's transferred from flip phones to smartphones and started spending a lot more time on social media, the kids who were rooted in religious communities or in countries that were more binding, had a more binding culture, they were somewhat protected. Whereas those who were more free, those who could spend more time, they ended up, in those countries, we ended up seeing the bigger increase. My point is that this is not, I think we both agree, it's not that, if you go on social media, it's going to make you depressed. The rapid, huge change that happened between 2010 and 2015 interacted with cultural variables. As Candace said, kids are embedded in different ways. And those who were embedded in real world communities of adults were more protected than those who were not so deeply embedded. That's what I think that tells us. And I'll just end by saying this fits exactly what Emil Durkheim found about suicide 120 years ago, that it's in the freest societies when people are not bound in, that's where you get the higher suicide rates.